Hi teachers, this is a quick informal training on the Fountas and Pinnell Phonics Kits for K through 2. Um, the intent of this PD is to give you an understanding of how to unpack the kit and also some key points for how to use the kit to get yourself started. So first of all, to be able to log into the online resources, every Round Rat campus has a registered login through their library email address. And then everyone's password is capital P for phonics and then 123. When you're on the online resource page, do make sure that you are looking at the online resource tab at the top. Otherwise, you won't be able to log in with that email address. So you just double check that you're on the correct one. And when you're on the online account, you'll be able to find the reproducibles, you'll be able to find the master sequence spacing guides, you'll be able to find online assessments and a little bit more that we'll go into a little bit later. So a video that I have for you to watch when I send this presentation to you is the Lucy show, and it was her and Ricky. He's reading a book to her, and he comes across lots of words that have the ow sound, the O-U-G-H, but he is realizing that as he's trying to read to her, those 4 letters can make a bunch of different sounds, as in the word though and stuff. And so basically what you're seeing through this video is his struggle to learn English, as complex as it is. The point of it is if you only are teaching your phonics instruction in isolation, which means you're only teaching it within your phonics block, your students are not going to be able to transfer that learning into context or into a text. And so I have here on the side that your phonics instruction needs to be taught implicitly and explicitly, so that it's being taught in isolation where you're teaching it the skill, but you also need to be transferring it over so that they're able to apply it into context and put it into practice. And one thing you'll notice in this book is he starts trying to use different context clues towards the end of the video to determine which of the sounds the O-U-G-H is going to make. With a phonics program being taught only in isolation, your students won't have that advantage. They won't be able to use the context clues to figure out what the sound of the word is making. And so keep his experience in mind when you watch it, to understand why it's important to not only teach your phonics during your phonics time, but also transfer and connect that learning throughout your other balanced literacy components during your classroom day. So one thing Fountas and Pinnell does offer for you on their the online resource login is a getting started video. I definitely recommend that you watch this video. It definitely gives you an understanding of what comes in your kit, how to organize and unpack your kit, and a little bit more of the why behind it. So this is a good 10-minute video that you could watch that'll help you understand more about the kit as well. And I am mentioning a lot of the key points in this presentation. So the phonics kit is arranged through 9 areas of learning. So as you go through your lessons, you can open and look at the master lesson guide. You will see that the different sections of lessons are based off of these 9 areas of learning, from early literacy concepts all the way down to word solving actions. And so your lessons don't go straight from the first learning area all the way down to the 9th one. They interconnect. They're mixed all together. So you're not going to teach all of early literacy concepts, then go into phonological awareness. Your suggested sequence has it to where you teach them intertwined. And so you will be working on several of these, maybe a couple of them in a row, and then it'll switch to a new learning area. And so these are just the basic phonics types of skills and learning areas that your students need in order to develop. You'll also notice in your book that you're going to see, it's on one of the front covers, you'll see this, a design to responsive literacy teaching. What the purpose of this is showing you, I'm going to click it so that you can see it larger. What this image is showing you is you have reading, writing, and phonics, and you also have your whole group, your small group, your individual, and then whole group again down here. And so what it's showing you is the different balanced literacy components and when they are taught and how they connect. So right here, my interactive read aloud that I'm going to do for my reading mini lesson, it's going to be able to support me during my reading time, but also my writing time. And that interactive read aloud is a bridge to help me with my mini lesson that I'm going to do later in the day. It also can be referenced again during my shared reading and so on and so forth. So it shows you that once you do your reading mini lesson here, that learning can then transfer into their small group, and it can also transfer into their book clubs. From there, they will have their independent literacy work that it transfers into, and then independent reading and writing about reading. And then finally, at the end, you have your group share of how they use that reading. So this diagram is showing you how the teaching that you do with your students, you're being responsive to them, and it also is showing up in various places in your instruction. I do want to point out here, because we're talking about phonics, at the phonics and word studies section, if you notice, it's not connected over here. So you have your phonics lesson here that we do, which would be implicit, kind of by itself or in isolation as you would see. But if you notice, you have these little gold dots here. And what that's showing you is that your phonics lesson may be taught over here at one point during your day. But because you're being responsive to your students, you are going to bring up that focus sprinkled throughout your day and your other balanced literacy components. So whatever you're teaching, say you were teaching them about syllables, that might be something that you mention again as you're in guided reading or when you're doing your shared reading or shared writing. So it's bridging that connection of all the learning so that your students have the chance to put your phonics back into context and not just during that phonics lesson that you're working on. Okay, so when you open your kit, what all will you get inside? So you will have blue and purple folders. The purple folders are based around the 9 areas of learning that you saw in the previous slide. And the blue folders are based around the months. And so the purpose behind that is when you first are starting out, you're going to end up taking your lessons and organizing them behind the area of learning that they go with. The blue folders being optional are as you teach throughout the year, you can start putting those lessons behind those months so that in the future you know where you taught them and when. So that's the purpose behind the folders. You will receive we call it the big book. This is your main lesson book. And inside of that book, you do have your suggested lesson pacing. You also have the master lesson guide. And then there's several pages in the beginning that often get skipped over, but it has valuable information, which we'll reference later, that is very important to getting your phonics program up and running. You'll also come across, we call it the small book or the backbone, and that's going to be your comprehensive phonics spelling and word study guide. You'll have a sing and song poetry book, and that's going to give you a bunch of different poems that you can use to extend your learning or for generative lessons that we're going to reference later. You will have some saran wrapped materials that are ready resources. Some of them will be for specific lessons that you need, and some are going to be generic lessons that are for just using throughout your instruction. So getting to some of your ready resources are lesson specific and some are general resources. Notice the yellow circles. If it is a lesson specific resource, it will have an abbreviation for the 9 area of learning that it pertains to and the lesson number. So what you're going to do with those is you would take those and you would insert them into your lesson folders and put them behind the 9 areas of learning so that they're ready to go when you teach that lesson. The general lessons, you would just want to create some manila folders for those. For example, those right here are uppercase ABC letters. So I would put all of those in one manila folder so that I can access those when I need them. So here are some tips for unpacking. I mentioned a little bit earlier. So the first step you're going to want to do, you have a clear tote. You're going to take those purple folders and put those in there, and you want them in order of the 9 areas of learning. The blue folders you can put in the back. You can hang on to them for later, that's up to you. But you're going to start with the purple folder so that you know which area of learning they go with. Next, the kits that we received were some of the first ones that came out. So kinder and first grade, you had some white lesson folders here, but they were not labeled. So you have to take the lessons, and if you click on this image, it will take you to the typed labels so that you can print them out on Avery labels and put them on your lesson folders. So basically, you're going to want to take those folders and label them. And then once they're labeled, put them behind the 9 area of learning that they go to. So this one says ELC. That would go with the early literacy concept area of learning. And so I would stick that behind that one. Second grade kits got lucky. They got the updated version. So they didn't have the white folders. Theirs come with these ready-made folders that have the lessons printed on them, already labeled. So for them, they don't necessarily even need to look at the big lesson book because each of these folders already has the lesson for them. So then you would take these lessons and put them behind the correct 9 area of learning that they go with and keep them in order so that it's easier to access them later. So within these folders, I would then take those ready resources and file them. I would skim through them, flip through them, and find the ones that go with each lesson and stick them in those folders. Oh, I got ahead of myself. So here is your ready resources. Like I said before, if it's a specific lesson one, there's only like maybe up to 4 or 5 pages that go with it. I would go through my stack, put those inside the folder they go with, stick it behind the 9 area of learning. And then the generic or the general resources, you're just going to want to take those and put them in manila folders and just handwrite yourself what it is, and then keep those in a separate area for right now. Okay, again, these are your lesson specific ones, and so you can put those behind the folders. Right here is an example of somebody who took manila folders and labeled the general resources and kept them in a box. These could possibly fit inside of your actual phonics kit box that came with it, whereas you put all your lesson-specific things in your clear tote that we have purchased for you. Okay, right here I have an X on this, and it says you do not have to go through all of these ready resources and break apart the cards. Do not waste your time doing that right now. It is best to take the papers as they are, stick them in the folder that they pertain to, and as you go, separate the cards if needed, because you may not even use some of the things in there, so you don't want to sit there for hours in your living room floor breaking apart cards that you don't need right now. So file them, we'll separate them later. Okay, so once you've done all that, you do have your tote put together there. So this is a picture of having all of the 9 areas of learning specific lessons in their tote, and then they keep their manuals and books inside of that. Then you would have your manila folders with your general resources in your actual phonics kit box that it came with, and so that you can still access those. They're just separate due to space. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the books that you received. So again, you have your phonics spelling and word study lesson book. You have your phonics spelling and word study guide, and you have a sing a song of poetry book. The big book is going to have all of your lessons inside of it. So if you are a kinder or first grade teacher who has those white folders, maybe as time goes on, you can photocopy the lessons as you go and stick a copy inside the folders just in case something happens to your book, or just so it's easily to access in the future. I do want you to make sure that you look at the pages in the front of your book and do specifically call attention to the sections that are called suggested sequence, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes. There's a section called planning and implementing the lesson, so that gives you an idea of how to plan and go with it. And there's a section called routines and instructional procedures that we'll talk about here on the next slide. But those are some areas you definitely want to go in there and read about. The phonics spelling and word study guide, or the small book, aka the backbone. So the purpose of this book is it shows you the different skills and concepts for each grade level. And it shows you, if you look closely on this picture, so I have the reading behavior, and then language that we use to talk about it with the students. But it tells me right here with the dots which grade level it's taught in or introduced in, so that I can see when that learning is starting to occur and if I was the first one to introduce that particular skill. This is a really good area that you could cross-reference with the literacy continuum, and you can go in there and see and match it up kind of as to what the reading behaviors are in their phonics section as well, so that you can get a little bit more information on how to support the students with it. The Sing a Song of Poetry book. So this one is providing you with additional poems that can be used for extending a lesson or for the generative lessons that I'll talk to you more about in here. So this is a book that you definitely want to keep around because it does go in there and there is a list that does tell you the poems and what skills that they would go perfectly with. So it's a good companion resource to the lessons. So suggested sequence. So in your lesson book, you do have your master lesson guide. This is not the sequence that you have to follow. So based on research, Fountas and Pinnell decided to organize the lessons by the 9 areas of learning, and they wanted to give teachers a suggested sequence that they could use to teach their students at different parts of the year. It is merely a suggestion. You do not have to follow it cover to cover because you want to be responsive for your students. You may follow it and then decide that, oh, my students already know this skill, or the majority of my students know this skill, so I'm going to move to this next one. So you also may not be in the exact same place as your other teammates because you are being responsive to your students in your specific class. So it's good to have the conversation with your teammates as to where they are and kind of understand where each other is and check in with that. But just know that this is not something that if I'm on lesson 10, that my teammate Mary is also on lesson 10. Because her students may have needed more time. Her students may have needed to fast forward and go to a lesson because they were already accomplished in that area. So just know that it is a suggested sequence and you have the autonomy to change it as needed for your class. I do want to point out that the second grade only has lessons that pertain around 6 of the areas of learning. So you will not see all 9 areas of learning show up in your master lesson guide. And that is because of the learning progression that has already occurred in kinder and first grade. So Round Rock ISD, when starting out, has suggested that you do follow the suggested sequence. But we are really big on being responsive to your students, as we have been talking about. So my advice to you is, because it's a growing year, feel free to follow the suggested sequence, but be responsive to your students and add and delete and extend lessons as needed. And some of the lessons in there have beautiful extensions that are perfect that you can also take into small groups. And one little tip that I do suggest is, as you're going through these lessons and reading about them, you might want to have different color sticky notes to represent whole groups or small group. And what I would do is, if I'm reading a lesson and you're like, that's a good lesson to do with some small group students, but maybe not whole group, I would flag that in green. Or if this is a perfectly good lesson for whole group, let me flag that with a red sticky note. Something that kind of tells you as you go through which would be good for what part of your day. Also, towards the back of your lessons, it does talk about extensions and other ways of teaching it. And in those areas are really good ideas of how to take that specific skill into small groups. So all of the lessons follow the same format. It's going to start with a teach, apply, share, and assess. So those are components that you will see in every lesson. Again, just like I said, so you have the teach, apply, share, and assess. And you'll notice right here, this is your teach. Okay, some other pieces you want to call attention to that are in your lessons. The first page does have a consider your students or your children. So this is where you really want to begin to understand where your students are specifically with this skill. You have a section here for working with English language learners. And so do know that all of your students are English language learners, but this section just gives you more advice on how to specifically work with students who are acquiring that language for the first time. you have in the upper corner here, you will need. So the top part right here that says ready resources, those are the ones that you may have filed already inside of your folders. And these right here that say online resources, these are additional resources that you can go onto the website and print. And one thing that I really would love to do for the teachers is send these online resources that are available for you. I already have them downloaded, so I want to send them off to Print Shop so that you already have them, and then we can file those behind the specific lessons so that you don't have to worry about copying those in the future. And then you have other materials like a pocket chart that you would need as well. The understanding the principle right here is explaining it in teacher language for you so that you understand the point of the lesson. And then the right here is called explain the principle, and that is to where you are explaining what you're teaching to students in a kid-friendly language. So these are really good and they go hand in hand together. Okay, so right here is an instructional procedures. And so for example, in this one, it's called say and sort. And so as referenced before when I was talking about going through your big book, you are going to want to find the page in the beginning of your big book that talks about these 10 instructional procedures. Every lesson in the apply section has a different instructional procedure, and it's really good to get your kids fluent in knowing these routines so that the apply sections flow more easily as time goes on. And so it's really important. So like this one is on page 36, so it's telling you what page to go to learn more about what that instructional strategy is telling you. The generative lessons. So generative lessons, in the first page of the actual lesson, you'll see this if it's a generative lesson. And what that basically means is it's a simple structure that you can use for similar content. So for example, if I was teaching, I'm just going to say Magic E for some reason, I might use that same lesson again to teach the other long vowel sounds that go with that. And so these lessons are generic and can be taught or extended. So if you have a generative lesson and it's talking about multiple little skills that go with that concept, then you might do that generative lesson several times to cover all of those different skills. So just pay close attention to that. Also, if there is a check mark, it lets you know that there are other possible ways that you can teach this to your student. Some of the lessons will have a triangle. I couldn't get a picture of the triangle, but if there is a triangle in the upper corner of your lesson, that indicates that this is where an area of learning is starting. So if it had been going through a sequence of syllable lessons and then suddenly it's starting with a different decoding strategy, then it's going to put a check mark that lets you know it's starting a new area of learning. So this is a pacing ideas, and so teachers have troubleshooted how to use this in the classroom. And so because the lessons are meant to be mini and you don't want to go over like 10 minutes with it, one thing a lot of teachers have found is that one day they'll do the teach section of a lesson, and then the next day they'll review it and do the apply, share, and assess section. And then the following day they'll do a new one, and then the apply, share, and assess. And so they're only doing about 2, maybe 3 lessons a week max. And you want to leave that extra time because things come up. You might have to reteach. Your students might need extra practice. So a good rule of thumb would just be to do 2, maybe 3 lessons a week. And then down here is another example where you could do teach and apply, and then share and assess. So at the bottom of your lessons, or the last page of your lessons, there will be the lesson assessments. And so this specific example is telling you that you can observe your students' ability, and that's one formative assessment. And you can also notice whether they're using it in their writing. So those are the 2 formative assessments that you can use. Sometimes there's more than that. But if you notice here, the last bullet says you may wish to use phonological awareness assessment B or K. These are more diagnostic assessments that can be found online, and you do not have to use them at any specific point. You can use these at just a random time in the year when you want to find out where a student is with a specific phonological awareness skill for maybe a whole other purpose. So these are just good assessments to be aware of that you can use at any time of the year for your students. They are not required by Round Rock ISD, and that is because we do not want to give you extra assessments with all the other assessments that we have for our students. Okay, on the last page, you also have a connect learning across context, sorry. And what that is showing you is that part where we talked about that your phonics instruction needs to be implicit and explicit. So you've taught the skill implicitly, but you need to be explicit with it and let them have experiences with it in context. So this specific example shows you how to take that clapping syllables into your interactive read aloud. Or shared reading, interactive writing, and independent writing. And so this is bridging that learning and sprinkling that in throughout your day into the other balanced literacy components. So it would be natural to just be like, if I'm teaching this in phonics and I'm reading a book and that shows up, let me call attention to it so that the kids are getting it in context as well. Okay, so when you go online, once you've logged into the online resources, you can click what grade level you are. And when you're going through here, you will find a variety of different materials that we'll talk about here. Actually, let me go back. So when you're on this one, if you click your specific grade level, you will be able to print online resources. You will be able to print out the master lesson guides. You'll also be able to print the assessments. You will not be able to print the actual lessons themselves because people can easily reproduce those and not purchase the kit. And so those are not available on there. So that's why I said if you're kinder or first and you have the white folders, you might want to photocopy the lessons and stick them in your folders because you do not have the ability to print them. So Game Maker, #gamechanger. So when you're once you've clicked your grade level, if you notice that this Game Maker thing right here, this is the option where you can go in and actually create additional resources for your generative lessons. So on here, it gives you the opportunity to customize and make word cards, letter cards, game boards, checkerboards, dominoes, swords, all kinds of things. And so if you're using a generative lesson, this is a good place to go to so that you can customize it and personalize it for your students. And last but not least, Round Rock ISD has a resource page dedicated for the Fountas and Pinnell Phonics Spelling and Word Study System. So if you click this link, it will take you to our page that we have resources on here for you. So here's again you can click here and get the labels for the kinder and first grade folders, the unpacking guide, materials. So a lot of the things that are on the actual Fountas and Pinnell website, we've already saved in here for you. So it has your master lesson guides. These are some phonics videos, I believe, of teachers doing lessons for you that you can watch. So this is a good reference place that you can go to. All right, so I hope this helps you get started using your kit. If you have additional questions, please let me know. There is a lot that goes into this, so it will take time to adjust to it, but I hope I gave you enough that you can start having the conversations with your team and start using it as the year starts out. But thank you, and I hope this helps.